The observation deck of the Valorian science vessel Horizon's Echo had witnessed countless atrocities across 3 millennia of deep space exploration. Yet nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared Magistrate Kovren for what the data screens were displaying. "Run the analysis again," Kovren commanded, his 4 eye stalks focusing intently on the holographic readout. His mandibles clicked with agitation, a nervous habit he'd never quite managed to suppress despite centuries of diplomatic training. The junior analyst, Thex, trembled slightly as she manipulated the controls. Her chitinous exoskeleton gleamed under the artificial lights as she punched in the sequence for the 3rd time. The results remained unchanged. Impossible results. Infuriating results. "The data is consistent, Magistrate," Thex reported, her voice barely above a whisper. "The coordinates match. The temporal markers align. This isn't a system error." Kovren's breathing slowed to a deliberate rhythm, a technique taught in the Valorian meditation chambers. It didn't help. His respiratory spiracles still fluttered with barely contained anxiety. Before them hung the coordinates of the Kepler Station, a human military outpost on the edge of the Zephyr Nebula, the station that had been annihilated 47 solar cycles ago by the Vraak Dominion. The same station that, according to these readings, was currently transmitting a full-spectrum distress beacon across 17 different communication channels. "They're dead," Kovren muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "They have to be dead." "The beacon isn't speculation, sir," offered Tertius, the vessel's communications officer. His translation implants flickered as he processed the incoming data. "They're broadcasting live tactical coordinates, casualty reports, and something about ammunition expenditure rates. It's fragmentary, but it's definitely human." Kovren pressed his primary appendage against his cranial ridge. This was precisely the sort of complication he didn't need. Not after the Triumvirate Council had specifically instructed him to catalogue and document any remaining human colonies. Not after the explicit warning that humans were unpredictable. Not after they'd seen what humans did to the Vraak Dominion had been terrifying. 17 star systems under their control, a military that could level planets. A reputation built on 300 years of absolute conquest and scientific advancement. The Valorians had respected them, feared them, even though admitting such a thing in mixed company would have been career-ending. Then the humans showed up. "How long has the station been broadcasting?" Kovren asked quietly. Thex checked her secondary monitors. "Approximately 19 hours, sir. The signal amplitude suggests the beacon is operating from a partially functional main reactor. Life support is minimal. They estimate they have maybe 72 hours before complete systems failure." 72 hours, 3 days. 3 days for a species that should have been extinct to somehow continue broadcasting a distress call from a station that had been hit with enough kinetic weapons to vaporize the upper atmospheric layers. Kovren did something he rarely allowed himself to do. He accessed the classified archives, the restricted Precursor war logs that even most Valorian officials weren't cleared to view. The documentation of humanity's rise, their territorial expansion, their baffling refusal to acknowledge military defeat as anything approaching permanent. The logs were extensive. The Vril had engaged human forces 17 times across the Kepler sector. 17 separate military campaigns. The humans had lost 14 of those engagements decisively. They'd lost space stations, habitats, research facilities. They'd lost personnel by the thousands. They'd been cut off, surrounded and bombarded with weapons that defied their technological capabilities. And yet, was why Kovren was currently staring at a beacon transmitting from a station that should not exist. "Get me everything on file regarding human resilience," Kovren ordered. "Cross-reference military data, biological documentation, psychological profiles. I want to understand how they do this." "Do what, sir?" Tertius asked, though from his tone he already knew the answer. "Survive. They survive. They shouldn't be able to survive the way they do, but they keep surviving." Thex's eye-stalks twisted toward him with something approaching concern. "Are you suggesting a recovery operation, Magistrate?" The Council's directive was observation only. The humans have been isolated from the broader galactic community for a reason. I'm aware of the reasons, Kovren interrupted, though not unkindly. We believe them to be emotionally unstable. We believe them to be irrational in their application of violence. We believe them to be fundamentally unpredictable. He paused, allowing himself a click of dark amusement. The Vraak also believed those things. And now the Vraak no longer exist as an organized civilization. The observation deck fell silent. Only the gentle hum of the ship's engines and the steady pulse of the distress beacon disturbed the quiet. Kovren made his decision. Set a course for the Kepler Station. Maintain a distance of 50,000 kilometers. I want passive sensor scans only. No active targeting systems powered up. No weapons systems online. And absolutely no transmissions unless I explicitly authorize them. Is that understood? Magistrate. Thix began, her voice shaky. This could be interpreted as violating direct council orders. The council ordered us to observe and document remaining human populations, Kovren said smoothly. I'm documenting. Continue. The ship's trajectory shifted almost imperceptibly as Tertius input the new coordinates. Around them the cosmos continued its eternal dance, unaware that what was about to unfold would add another fascinating footnote to the Precursor war logs. Meanwhile, aboard the Kepler Station, things were far less controlled. Commander Marcus Whitmore hadn't slept in 38 hours, and it was absolutely showing. His uniform had scorch marks that no amount of cleaning would ever remove. His face bore the kind of grime that only came from crawling through ventilation shafts, while explosions rattled the infrastructure around you. Most notably, his left arm hung in a makeshift sling, created from a torn pressure suit and about 47 doses of determination. Damage report, he barked into the communication headset, his voice gravelly from breathing recycled oxygen. Lieutenant Sarah Okonkwo's response crackled through the speaker with all the clarity of a signal traveling through half-destroyed relay stations. Lower deck has been sealed off. 3 sections are now decompressed. We've lost pressure in the primary ammunition magazine, but thankfully most of it had already been moved to the secondary storage. Engineering estimates, we've got maybe 2 days before the reactor core becomes unstable. After that, well, we either fix it, or we'll be drifting through space trying to breathe vacuum and think happy thoughts. Happy thoughts don't convert oxygen, Marcus muttered, which earned him a tired laugh from somewhere in the background. No sir, they don't, but Captain Reeves says positive attitude might help with morale. Reeves is a psychologist who hasn't seen a deployment in 12 years. Tell him I'll worry about morale when we have functional life support systems. Marcus pulled up the tactical display on his handheld screen. The Vraak bombardment had stopped 43 hours ago, which was either very good or very, very bad. Either they'd decided the station was sufficiently destroyed to no longer warrant their weapons, or they were regrouping for the final strike. Honestly, at this point, Marcus would have taken a betting pool on which scenario was more likely, if he thought anyone had any money left to gamble with. Get me a status on the beacon, Marcus commanded as he made his way through the damaged corridors. His magnetic boots clicked against the metal plating with each step, a sound that had become strangely comforting over the past day and a half. Beacon is broadcasting on all frequencies, Okonkwo confirmed. We should expect rescue within 72 hours, assuming anyone received our distress signal before the Vraak knocked out our relay stations. Marcus didn't point out that the statistical likelihood of rescue was approximately 17%, or that most rescue operations required the rescuers to actually know you existed, or that nobody in the Valorian Collective was exactly rushing to save humans from anything. Instead, he said, "Good work. Keep the beacon running. And Sarah?" "Yes, sir. Get some sleep." "That's an order." There was a pause. Then respectfully, "Sir, you haven't slept either." "That's because I'm the commander. I'm required to make terrible decisions on caffeine and desperation alone. It's in the manual." He clicked off the communication before she could argue further. The station around him groaned like an old ship, which technically it was. The Kepler Station had been established 42 years ago as a scientific outpost. Then it had been converted into a military installation. Then it had been hammered by the Vraak with enough firepower to rearrange the molecular structure of everything inside it. And yet here they were. Marcus couldn't help but smile at that particular thought. The Vraak had absolutely underestimated them. Everyone always did. Humans looked soft. Humans had fragile skin and needed water and oxygen and regular meals. Humans got tired and sick and emotionally damaged by trauma. Humans were, by virtually every objective measure, inferior to most spacefaring species in terms of raw physical capacity. What most species seemed to miss was that humans were absolutely brilliant at improvisation, adaptation, and what one military theorist had termed creative destruction through sheer spite. The Vraak had bombed the Kepler Station expecting them to surrender. Instead, Marcus and his crew had gone underground, literally, and begun systematically dismantling every Vraak weapon platform in sensor range. It had been ugly, costly, and involved at least 2 incidents where Marcus himself had to manually reroute power systems, because there wasn't anyone else qualified left alive to do it. The station's AI, a program named Atlas that Marcus had always thought was pretentious, chimed in over the communication system. "Commander Whitmore, I've completed analysis of the atmospheric recycling system. We have approximately 17 hours before CO2 levels become dangerous. Can we patch it? Theoretically, yes. Practically? The necessary components are located in Section 7, which is currently exposed to hard vacuum." "Of course they are," Marcus said, managing to keep the resignation out of his voice. "Mostly, I'll organize a team. We'll need pressure suits, cutting equipment, and a spectacular amount of hope." "Hope is not typically calculated as an engineering variable," Atlas noted. "It should be. Hope gets humans to do impossible things regularly." As Marcus worked through the logistics of assembling a salvage team, on the Valorian vessel 50,000 kilometers away, Magistrate Kovren was beginning to understand something that had eluded the Vraak Dominion and confounded the entire Triumvirate Council. Humans didn't survive because they were smart. Well, they were smart, but that wasn't really the point. Humans survived because they refused to accept that survival wasn't an option. The Precursor war logs had documented this phenomenon repeatedly. Humans fighting in situations they should have lost. Humans defending positions they should have abandoned. Humans negotiating from positions of absolute weakness, as if they held every advantage. Most species saw survival as a binary state. You either made it, or you didn't. There was optimization, there was failure, and there was very little gray area in between. Humans seemed to exist almost entirely in that gray area. They found ways to survive that technically shouldn't have worked. They adapted to environments that should have killed them. They formed bonds with their crews that transcended ordinary military discipline and created something far more dangerous than any training manual could produce. "Open encrypted channels," Kovren ordered suddenly. "Sir?" Tertius looked startled at the command. "Open encrypted channels. I want to contact the station. We're about to initiate direct communication with the humans on the Kepler Station." Fix's eyestalks swiveled toward him in what could only be described as panic. "Magistrate, that's explicitly prohibited by Council directive. Contact with humans outside of formal diplomatic channels." "I'm aware of the regulations," Kovren said calmly. "I'm also aware that we're scientists. And what we have here is a fascinating question that demands an answer." "What question?" Tertius asked, his chitinous fingers poised over the communication array. "How do they do it?" Kovren gestured toward the Kepler Station. "How do they keep surviving? How do they maintain functionality in conditions that should have broken them? How do they find meaning in circumstances that suggest only futility?" He looked at his crew, these brilliant, cautious, beautifully logical Valorians who had spent centuries trying to understand the universe through measurement and observation and careful analysis. "Set the channel," Kovren commanded. "Let's ask them directly. I suspect their answer will be far more illuminating than any of our data could ever provide." The beacon on the Kepler Station continued its steady pulse, transmitting across the void. Inside the damaged structure, Commander Marcus Whitmore gathered his team and prepared for another impossible mission. Neither side knew it yet, But this communication was about to change everything about how the broader galactic community understood what it meant to be human. The communication frequency crackled to life with a sound that made every human on the Kepler Station freeze mid-task. Unidentified station, this is Magistrate Kovren of the Valorian science vessel Horizons, Echo. We are receiving your distress beacon. We have detected your location and current operational status. Before we proceed further, we require confirmation that this channel is being monitored by a sentient biological entity capable of response. Please acknowledge. Commander Marcus Whitmore stared at the communication speaker as if it had suddenly started speaking in ancient Sumerian. Around him, the handful of crew members who weren't actively fighting to keep the station functional looked equally baffled. "Did that just happen?" asked Captain James Rodriguez. "No, wait, that name was prohibited." Captain James Hollister then, the station's senior medical officer who'd somehow managed to patch up half the surviving crew with nothing but determination and a medical kit that had probably been outdated when dinosaurs still roamed Earth. "Yeah, someone just hailed us," Marcus confirmed, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he wasn't entirely certain this wasn't a stress-induced hallucination. Which is, frankly, terrifying. Sarah Okunko's voice crackled through the communication headset. "Commander, I'm reading an active vessel on long-range sensors. Valorian configuration. They're at optimal observation distance and maintaining position. No weapons systems activated. This is either the best luck we've had in 48 hours or the beginning of a very short comedy routine." Marcus made a split-second decision that was going to either cement his reputation as either a brilliant tactical commander or a complete fool. History would probably enjoy debating which one. "Open the channel," he commanded. "Let's talk to these people." The communication array hummed to life. Marcus took a breath, a real, genuine, slightly terrified breath, and began speaking. "Valorian vessel. This is Commander Marcus Whitmore of the Kepler Station. Yes, I'm a sentient biological entity. Yes, we're monitoring this channel, and yes, we would very much appreciate assistance if you're offering it. Fair warning though, we're somewhat compromised structurally and our social calendar is completely free for the next 72 hours before everything goes catastrophically wrong." There was a pause, a long pause. The kind of pause that made Marcus wonder if the Valorians were currently conferencing about whether humans were actually intelligent or simply suffering from oxygen deprivation-induced delusional episodes. Then, "Your directness is noted, Commander Whitmore. I am Magistrate Kovren. I represent a scientific observation mission investigating human populations in this sector. I must confess your survival in current conditions is unexpected." "Most survival usually is," Marcus replied, which earned him a thumbs up from Hollister, who was apparently finding dark humor to be therapeutic. "Tell me, Magistrate, how many vessels are you operating with?" "One. The Horizons Echo. We maintain crew complement of 73. Marcus did the mental mathematics. 73 Valorians against approximately 200 surviving humans on the station. The humans had the advantage of familiarity with the station's systems, but the disadvantage of being basically murdered from above for the past 48 hours. Valorians had superior technology, but the disadvantage of not actually knowing what they were walking into. "And the Vraak?" Marcus asked. "Have you detected any Vraak vessels in the sector?" Another pause. "Negative. Our scans detect no Vraak activity within 5 light-years. Are we correct in assuming they were attempting to neutralize your station?" "You're correct," Marcus confirmed. "They did a fairly thorough job of it too. We're currently operating on about 60% of normal systems. Our reactor is having philosophical questions about its continued existence, and I'm pretty sure half my crew is running on a mixture of adrenaline and spite. It's a whole thing." Magistrate Kovren's response carried something that might have been amusement filtered through layers of formal Valorian protocol. "Your species demonstrates remarkable capacity for humor during moments of significant distress. The Vraak typically respond to such situations with silence and despair." "Yeah, well, the Vraak aren't here anymore, are they?" Marcus said, and the satisfaction in his voice was something that even the communication array couldn't quite filter out. "They underestimated us. Most people do. We're soft, we're fragile, we get tired, but we're also creative, adaptable, and absolutely willing to break every rule of warfare and physics if it means surviving another day. The Vraak couldn't process that. They expected us to surrender. Instead, we started taking out their weapon platforms. Sarah's voice cut through the communication link. "Sir, the Valorians are moving closer. They're now at 37,000 kilometers and descending to 20. Peaceful approach, I'm guessing?" Marcus asked, more to himself than anyone else. "Appears to be," Sarah confirmed. "No weapons charging, no evasive maneuvers. They seem curious rather than hostile." Marcus made another command decision. "Magistrate Kovren, I'm going to assume you're not here to finish what the Vraak started. That assumption is currently keeping me from venting the station's atmosphere in a dramatic gesture of defiance. Please don't prove me wrong. Commander Whitmore, I assure you our intentions are purely observational. However, I must pose a question that has been troubling my scientific methodology. How did you maintain structural integrity during Vraak bombardment? The energy signatures we detected suggest weaponry that should have rendered your station uninhabitable within hours." Marcus felt something like a smile cross his face. "Because we didn't maintain structural integrity, Magistrate. We abandoned it. We evacuated to the lower sections, where the Vraak couldn't reach us, and then we started systematically dismantling their strike platforms, using remote targeting systems, and about 47 different improvised weapons. The upper sections, those are basically rubble, but the core infrastructure remained intact enough that we could keep going. You abandoned strategic high ground positions to consolidate defensive posture in areas of inferior technological access," Kovren said slowly, as if processing this information proved difficult. "This violates standard military doctrine. Standard military doctrine was written by species who hadn't spent the last 2 centuries learning how to survive in conditions that should have killed them," Marcus replied. "See, the thing about humans is that we don't follow standard doctrine. We follow whatever doctrine keeps us alive. Sometimes that's conventional, often it's absolutely insane. The Vraak couldn't adapt to that kind of randomness in our methodology." On the Valorian vessel, Magistrate Kovren was beginning to understand that this wasn't going to be a straightforward scientific documentation. This was something far more valuable and far more unsettling. This was insight into what made humans genuinely dangerous. "Commander Whitmore, I am going to propose a boarding operation. My team would conduct medical evaluation of your crew and provide emergency structural analysis regarding your reactor systems. We are equipped with advanced technology that might assist your survival probability calculations. Would you find such assistance acceptable?" Marcus glanced at Hollister, who gave a weak shrug that suggested medical assistance would be appreciated, even if it came from an alien species that technically had no reason to help them. "Send over your medical team and your best engineer," Marcus agreed. "I'll ensure you're met with minimal suspicion and maximum questions about your intentions. Your species' diplomatic approach requires effort to interpret," Kovren noted, though without apparent judgment. "Yeah, well, try being a human diplomat sometime," Marcus said. "We invented mixed signals in formal conversation." The Valorian shuttle descended toward the Kepler Station with the cautious precision of a species that genuinely believed they might be walking into a trap, which technically the Valorians were not in the sense of deliberate deception, but in the sense that humans operating under extreme stress sometimes developed unpredictable behavioral patterns that defied logical prediction. Magistrate Kovren himself descended with the boarding team, despite the objections of every single member of his crew. He had to see this. He had to understand this. The Precursor war logs had documented human resilience theoretically, but observing it in person was something else entirely. The airlock hissed open, revealing Commander Whitmore in person. The human was exactly as the database description suggested, bipedal, relatively fragile-looking, with a concerning number of injuries that should have made him non-functional. And yet here he stood, smiling in what the Valorian translation matrix interpreted as either genuine warmth or stress-induced psychological break. Magistrate Kovren, Marcus extended his intact arm in what the cultural database suggested was a formal human greeting gesture. "Welcome to the Kepler Station. I should warn you that we're currently operating under less than optimal conditions. Approximately 60% of the station is either destroyed or actively on fire. Life support is questionable. And my crew is running on caffeine, spite and the genuine belief that we're about to get rescued by Valorian scientists, which they either view as salvation or cosmic comedy. Kovren extended his primary appendage in response, mimicking the gesture as best as his physiology allowed. The sensation was strange, warm, slightly damp, carrying a faint tremor that suggested significant metabolic stress. Your species' capacity for verbal communication during moments of extremity is remarkable, Kovren observed. The Vraak maintained absolute silence when facing comparable casualties. That's because the Vraak never understood that talking keeps you sane, Sarah Okonkwo interjected, stepping forward with a datapad displaying the station's current system status. Humans process trauma through communication. We talk, we joke, we maintain social bonds even when everything around us is falling apart. It's not efficient by mathematical standards, but it works. Kovren's eyes talks focused on Sarah with intense interest. You are the human designated as Sarah Okonkwo. I am, Sarah confirmed. You've done your homework. We have accessed your personnel database, Kovren explained. I admit I expected to find individuals broken by trauma. Instead, I find officers performing critical functions while demonstrating behavioral patterns that suggest emotional resilience exceeding statistical probability. That's because humans don't break the way you'd expect, Marcus said, gesturing toward his medical officer. Captain Hollister here has been performing emergency surgeries on what amounts to a kitchen table with materials salvaged from the station's hydroponics lab. Most species would consider him non-functional within hours of his injuries. But humans? We keep going. We keep adapting. We keep solving problems because the alternative is accepting defeat, and we've apparently evolved to find that option absolutely unacceptable. Kovren processed this information while the Valorian engineering team spread through the station, conducting assessments with expressions of barely concealed horror at the human approach to damage control and emergency repairs. Your reactor system is operating at 72% capacity, reported Sex, returning from her inspection with data readings that suggested the impossible. Your species has completed repairs using materials that technically should not have maintained structural integrity. Your engineering approach violates approximately 47 documented safety protocols. Yeah, well, safety protocols assume that someone with proper equipment is available to do the repair, Marcus explained cheerfully. When you don't have that, you improvise. Sometimes your improvisation works. Sometimes it doesn't. This time it worked, so nobody's complaining. Over the next 6 hours, the Valorians and humans worked in tandem to stabilize the Kepler Station's critical systems. The experience was educational for both parties in ways that extended far beyond simple technical knowledge. The Valorians learned that humans approached problems with a chaotic creativity that somehow consistently produced functional results, despite violating mathematical probability in almost every measurable way. The humans learned that the Valorians possessed technology and methodologies that could fix problems in approximately 1/3 the time it would have taken them. More importantly, Marcus and Kovren began to understand each other. Why did you stay? Kovren asked as they worked together to replace a damaged power conduit using Valorian fusion welding equipment. When the Vraak attacked, you could have evacuated. Your long-range communications suggest escape vectors that would have been possible in the early hours of the bombardment. Marcus considered the question while watching the fusion torch seal metal atoms back into their proper configuration. Because this is home, he said finally, and because leaving would have meant abandoning 70,000 tons of research data, advanced weaponry, and strategic positioning that the Valorian Collective might have needed later. And because my crew trusted me to find a way to survive, and because humans don't abandon ship unless there's literally no other option. Your emotional attachment to location overrides survival probability calculations? Kovren asked, his tone carrying something like fascination. Always, Marcus confirmed. That's what the Vraak never understood. You can't calculate humans using pure mathematics. We're not optimized. We're not efficient. We're stubborn, irrational, and absolutely convinced that impossible situations are just challenging problems waiting for the right creative solution. Kovren's mandibles clicked with what might have been recognition. This explains the Precursor war documentation. The Vraak encountered genuine unpredictability. They responded with increased force. This escalated human defensive response, which they interpreted as additional threat rather than human adaptation mechanism. And then they got eaten alive by the adaptability they kept triggering, Sarah added, joining them with a diagnostic report suggesting the reactor was now operating at 93% capacity. See? That's the thing about humans. When you back us into a corner, we don't surrender. We become creative. We become dangerous. The Vraak learned that the hard way. By the time the Valorian team was preparing to depart, the Kepler Station had moved from critical failure scenario to stable operational status. More importantly, Magistrate Kovren had begun to comprehend something that would reshape how the Valorian Collective understood humanity. "Commander Whitmore," Kovren said as he prepared to return to his vessel, "I intend to file a report with the Triumvirate Council. I will recommend that humanity be reclassified from isolated species with unknown potential to recognized participants in galactic affairs. Your species demonstrates qualities that the broader community would benefit from understanding." Marcus smiled, genuine exhaustion and relief mixing into an expression that Kovren's translation systems interpreted as profound satisfaction. "Just don't recommend military alliance," Marcus said. "We're probably more dangerous as neutral observers than as allies. We have a tendency to show up where we're not expected with solutions that technically shouldn't exist. Your species' self-awareness regarding your own threat potential is noted," Kovren responded. "It is reassuring." As the Valorian shuttle lifted off, carrying Magistrate Kovren back to his vessel, Marcus watched from the observation deck. Sarah stood beside him, both of them still covered in burns and dirt and the general detritus of trying to keep a space station intact during catastrophic failure. "Think they'll actually help?" Sarah asked. "I think they understand we don't need their help to survive," Marcus replied. "But I suspect they'll offer it anyway, because that's what you do when you encounter something genuinely extraordinary. You document it, you study it, and if you're smart you try to understand it before it inevitably surprises you." Above them, the Valorian vessel initiated its departure sequence. But before it jumped to faster-than-light travel, Magistrate Kovren transmitted one final message. "Commander Whitmore, I have added a note to the Precursor war logs. It reads as follows. One species consistently defied probability, adapted to impossible circumstances, and refused to accept the concept of permanent defeat. They are called humans. They were underestimated by every opponent encountered. None of those opponents survived their underestimation. Recommendation: observe carefully, respect greatly, approach cautiously, engage only if absolutely necessary. The universe became considerably more complicated when humans learned to leave their homeworld." Marcus watched the message display on his screen and felt something like pride settle into his chest. "That's basically the most complimentary insult I've ever received," he said to no one in particular. "That's basically humanity's entire reputation," Sarah replied, summed up in one Valorian diplomatic assessment. The Kepler Station continued its orbit around an insignificant star in an overlooked sector of space. The humans aboard it had survived. They had adapted. They had proven once again that the universe's greatest threat wasn't the species with the most advanced weapons or the most logical approach to problem solving. The greatest threat was the species that refused to accept defeat as a permanent condition. And that species was called human.